It was supposed to be a celebration. His birthday. Just the two of us, candles flickering, a meal I cooked with hands that had held him since infancy. But what came out of his mouth wasn't gratitude. It was a sentence sharp enough to gut me. No shouting, no broken plates, just a silence so complete it rang in my ears for days. That night, something inside me cracked, not loudly, but deep like ice shifting beneath a frozen lake. What followed wasn't chaos. It was precision, quiet steps, careful choices. And then I was gone. Not missing, just absent in the exact way he begged for. What he didn't realize was that some wishes get granted not out of love, but because the love ran dry. This isn't just a story. It's a reckoning, a quiet one. If you've ever been made to feel like your presence was a burden, this one's for you. Hit that like button if it echoes something in you. Subscribe if you've ever walked away without slamming the door. And tell me in the comments, where are you now and what finally made you leave? I'm here, and I'm listening. The chocolate cake was starting to sweat a little in my left hand, the frosting softening as I walked across the backyard, the spring air thick with the scent of burgers and beer. In my right arm, tucked carefully under the crook of my elbow, was a small velvet-wrapped box containing a watch, a vintage Omega my father had once worn with pride, which I'd spent 2 months and 3 trips to a specialty jeweler getting cleaned, restored, and fitted with a new strap. Ethan had admired it once in passing, back in December, when he visited my room looking for something and caught a glimpse of it in my top drawer. He'd said it looked badass, and I'd tucked that comment away, thinking maybe it would mean something to him someday. Today was that day, his 28th birthday, and despite all the hard years, the arguments, the silence, the disappointments, I believed maybe we'd turn a corner. Maybe this gift, this cake, this party was a gesture he'd recognize for what it was. I even bought the good beer, rented extra chairs, upgraded the grill, and hired a catering service for the appetizers. All he had to do was notice. As I approached the sliding glass door that led to the kitchen, I slowed down. Laughter echoed through the air, low and loud, the kind of laughter you only hear when young people feel safe, secure, and a little buzzed. Through the glass, I could see Ethan standing near the grill, drink in hand, gesturing animatedly as Travis and Logan flanked him on either side. At the patio table, Brianna sat half involved, her fingers swiping across her phone screen. They all looked comfortable, relaxed, like they belonged. I paused just outside the door, my hand resting on the handle, not quite ready to interrupt. And then I heard it. "Man, your dad really went all out for this party," Travis said, taking a long sip of his beer. "Seriously, new speakers, gourmet sliders, those mini crab cakes? Fancy." Ethan let out a dry laugh and shook his head. "Yeah, well, that's what he does. Tries to buy my affection like he always does. Thinks spending money makes up for being overbearing." My heart dropped just a little. The cake wobbled in my hand, but I steadied it, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was joking. Maybe it was just a moment of bravado among friends. But then Logan chimed in. "At least he gives a damn. My old man hasn't called since Thanksgiving. That should have shifted the tone, should have made Ethan feel fortunate, but it didn't." Ethan scoffed. "Yeah, well, Robert's always breathing down my neck. Get a job, Ethan. Get off my couch. Get your act together." Like he has any idea what it's like out there. Rent's insane, jobs suck, and he still thinks we live in the 80s or something. I blinked hard. Robert. Not Dad. Just Robert. That word felt like a nail driven into my chest. I stood frozen, feet planted just outside the party, watching my son vent about the man who had paid for his education, his car, the roof over his head, and yes, this very celebration. Honestly, Ethan said, raising his bottle in a mock toast. The best gift he could give me this year is to disappear from my life forever. Laughter exploded from the group. Travis clinked his bottle to Ethan's, chuckling. Damn, that's cold. You could always move out, Brianna said without lifting her eyes from her screen. Ethan shrugged. With what money? He controls everything. Still treats me like I'm 12. More laughter. I felt something shift inside me. Not just sadness, but something colder, harder. The box under my arm pressed heavier against my ribs. That watch suddenly didn't feel like a gift. It felt like an anchor I'd been dragging behind me for nearly 3 decades. I thought of all the birthdays before this one. Ethan's 5th, when I stayed up past midnight assembling a Lego spaceship. His 10th, when I taught him how to ride a bike without training wheels. His 16th, when I handed him the keys to a used sedan I'd spent months fixing up. And now here I was 62 years old, hiding outside my own house like an intruder, listening to my son talk about me like I was a problem to be erased. He raised his bottle again. At least the rent's free, he said with a grin. A scream, a shattered plate, a slammed door. But this wasn't rage. It was clarity, a cold, sobering realization that there was nothing left to fix. I had been trying to fix it for too long. I had been patching holes in a relationship that had long since rotted beneath the surface. What kind of man stands in his own home and listens to his son publicly fantasize about his disappearance? I knew what I had to do. For years, I let things slide. For years, I told myself he'd grow out of it, that the attitude was a phase, that he would mature, that one day he'd see the effort, the sacrifices, the nights I didn't sleep, the overtime I took, the years I put off retirement just to keep his lights on. But today, on the day he turned 28, he had made it perfectly clear how little it all mattered to him. No more excuses. No more waiting for him to come around. It was time to address this face to face. I walked back to the sliding door, opened it with calm, steady hands, and stepped out onto the patio. I didn't bring the cake. I didn't bring the gift. I didn't bring anything except the words I kept locked inside me for far too long. The sun had started to dip lower, casting golden streaks across the lawn. Music thumped from the speakers. The grill smoked lazily. Ethan was exactly where I'd left him, beer in hand, surrounded by the same people who laughed at my expense. I walked straight toward him. Some guests noticed me approaching and paused their conversations. A few turned their heads, sensing something had shifted. Travis glanced up. Logan leaned slightly back. Ethan saw me last, his casual smile faltering just for a second before hardening again into that smug, dismissive look he always wore when he knew he was about to be challenged. "Ethan," I said, my voice louder than I expected, clearer than I felt. "Can we talk?" Privately. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just shrugged and said, "Whatever you heard, it's true." The air seemed to shift. Conversations quieted. A few more people turned to look. "You're interfering with my life," Ethan continued, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everyone here knows it." I stood my ground. "After everything I've done for you?" I asked, feeling the weight of 3 decades press against my chest. "Nobody asked you to," Ethan replied with a snort. "That was your choice to support me. You act like I owe you something for decisions you made. That's not how this works." His words hung there, sharp and final. Travis stepped in, like a backup dancer in a rehearsed scene. "He's got a point, Mr. Reed. Parents choose to have kids. Kids don't choose to be born." The crowd murmured. I could see some of them shifting uncomfortably. A few looked down at their drinks. Others waited, hungry for the drama. 28 years, I said, voice low but deliberate, of providing everything you needed. Ethan shrugged, his tone rising. "And I never asked for any of it. That's your problem. You think sacrifice equals control." Logan chuckled behind him. Classic boomer logic. I struggled. "So now you owe me." The laughter returned, smaller this time, tinged with discomfort. But Ethan soaked it in like applause. "So when you said you wished I'd disappear," I said, "you meant it." His eyes flickered for the briefest second. A crack. But then the bravado returned. "Yeah," he said, "I meant it. You hover. You lecture. You make everything about your expectations. Maybe if you had your own life instead of trying to live through mine, we'd both be better off." That one landed hard. A few guests stopped pretending not to listen and stared openly now. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, my back hunched, hands resting on my knees, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, God knows I was, but because the pain had turned into something colder, something still and deliberate. It was like stepping out a storm and realizing the house is already flooded. You don't panic, not anymore. You just start calculating what to save, what to leave behind, and what to burn. The ceiling fan spun above me, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself think about everything that had led to this moment. Not just tonight, not just Ethan's cruel words, but the years that had paved the road to this confrontation. I thought about the nights I stayed late at the office so Ethan could have a warm meal and electricity. I remembered the morning he crashed the Honda Civic and I drained half my savings to replace it, just so he wouldn't be stranded. I remembered the tuition bills, the gas money, the late night pickups when he had too much to drink, and the endless conversations trying to motivate him out of the slump he called adulthood. And every single time, I told myself it was what a father did. You give, you support, you sacrifice, you keep showing up even when it hurts. But what did Ethan see? Not support, not love. He saw it as control. He saw a man hovering over his life like a shadow instead of safety net. To him, every time I paid a bill or offered advice, I wasn't helping, I was suffocating him. He didn't see the man who worked 60-hour weeks to make sure his son never went hungry. He saw a man standing between him and his so-called independence. And that's when I realized something that should have been obvious for years. Ethan didn't want freedom. He wanted funded freedom. He wanted the illusion of autonomy without the burden of responsibility. He didn't resent my rules. He resented my presence. And what's worse, I had allowed it. I had enabled it, encouraged it, even protected it. I had been complicit in my own erasure. When he rolled his eyes at my stories during family dinners, I laughed it off. When he skipped out on job interviews I helped arrange, I told myself he just needed more time. When he used my credit card without asking, I let it slide with a warning. I swallowed every insult, every eye roll, every passive-aggressive comment, all in the name of love. And tonight I saw where that road led. It led to my own son wishing I would disappear. I stood up from the bed, walked to the dresser, and stared into the mirror above it. The man looking back wasn't weak. He wasn't broken. He was tired, yes. Weathered, definitely, but not defeated. I saw in that reflection a man who had given his entire life to someone who had stopped seeing him as a person a long time ago. I saw a man who deserved better. The corners of my mouth didn't smile, but they didn't sag either. They sat firm and resolute. My mind drifted to last year's Thanksgiving. I'd asked Ethan to help set the table. He said he was too busy doing what I never asked. I just did it myself like I always did. I remember the Christmas dinner where I invited his friends, trying to show them I wasn't the ogre he made me out to be. After dessert, Travis joked that I probably had a rule book for dinner conversation. Ethan laughed and raised his glass, saying, "You have no idea." That night, I cleaned up alone while they drank wine and watched a game in the living room. They never even thanked me. And then there was the job fair last November. I drove Ethan to 3 different locations, helped him prep answers, coached him the night before. He came back saying the pay was insulting and the commute was too long. Later, I found out he showed up late and wore sneakers with a stained hoodie. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said, "Why would I waste time on a job that pays less than what you already give me?" That should have been the moment. That should have been the wake-up call. But I let it slide just like everything else. Until now. Because now, there was nothing left to slide. I walked to the closet, pulled open the door, and stared at the rows of shirts and ties I hadn't worn since I retired. I used to wear those every day, thinking I was building something, providing a foundation for my son to stand on. But somewhere along the way, he started believing the foundation was the whole house, that it would always be there, that it was owed to him. And I started believing that if I just gave more, he would eventually appreciate it, that if I bent further, he would stop pushing. But he never did. The more I gave, the more he expected. It was the quiet conviction of a man who had finally recognized that love, without boundaries, becomes a leash, and that my own kindness had been twisted into a rope I'd unknowingly tied around my own neck. Ethan wanted me to disappear. He had said it with such ease, with an audience, with laughter and beer foam still on his lips. And I realized I had two choices. I could fade away silently like he hoped I would, or I could make my presence and my absence mean something. I chose the latter. I took a deep breath, stood tall, and left the bedroom with a plan forming in my mind. Each step down the stairs sounded different now. Not the heavy tread of a broken man, but the calculated rhythm of someone preparing to draw a line in stone. I walked past the counter where the cake still sat untouched, past the wrapped watch I now had no intention of giving. I headed toward the patio doors and stepped out once more into the sea of my son's entitlement. The party hadn't changed. Music still thumped from the wireless speakers. Smoke drifted lazily from the grill, and Ethan's friends laughed like nothing had happened. Ethan himself stood holding a fresh beer, basking in the casual arrogance that had defined him for years. But everything had changed inside me. I walked across the yard, not toward my son, but toward the DJ table where the sound system was set up. My eyes locked on the small black wireless microphone resting beside the speaker. I picked it up without hesitation. The music blared for a few more seconds until I found the volume dial and turned it all the way down. The silence that followed landed like a slap. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. The party stilled. I raised the microphone to my mouth and spoke with deliberate calm. "The party is over," I said. "I'm asking everyone to leave my property now." A ripple moved through the crowd. Travis and Logan looked at each other, unsure if this was a joke. Brianna blinked up from her phone. Ethan stepped forward, his beer bottle tilted slightly, confusion melting into defiance. "Nobody's going anywhere," he announced, raising his voice to the crowd like some self-declared mayor of the backyard. "This is my party. Everyone's welcome to stay." He turned toward me then, face hardening. "Don't ruin this, Dad. This is my property," I said into the mic, "and I have the legal right to decide who stays and who leaves." Jason, one of the newer faces I didn't recognize, chuckled from behind the barbecue. "Come on, Mr. Reed. Don't be dramatic. We're not hurting anything." I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes on Ethan. "You told your friends you wanted me gone. Well, this is what that looks like." Ethan stepped closer now, his voice dripping with condescension. "Dad, put the microphone down and stop embarrassing yourself. These are my friends. This is my birthday. You're acting like a lunatic." I let the microphone hang loosely in one hand, speaking now in my natural voice, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I own this house, Ethan. I pay every bill. I paid for this party. I pay for the roof over your head. And I've had enough." Ethan laughed, tried to regain control of the moment. "So what? You've been supporting me for years. That's what parents do. You can't just kick everyone out because you're in a bad mood." "Actually, I can," I said. "And I am." The murmuring around us grew louder. Some guests looked like they wanted to disappear. Others stared openly, as if watching a live show. Brianna giggled again, clearly entertained. "If you don't want to leave on your own," I said calmly into the microphone again, "I'll call the police." Ethan's smirk faltered. "You're not serious," Travis said, but even he didn't sound sure anymore. I set the microphone back down and turned toward the house. 5 minutes, I said over my shoulder. I gave my address and was told an officer would be dispatched immediately. I thanked her and hung up. There was no shaking in my hands, no second guessing in my mind. Just clarity. I'd spent too many years being ignored, walked over, or guilted into compliance. Now I was done negotiating. 5 minutes passed, then 7. Through the window, I watched as the guests continued drinking and talking, though the laughter had noticeably quieted. They were nervous now, uncertain. I spotted Ethan near the grill, animatedly explaining something to Travis and Logan, no doubt spinning the story to cast himself as the victim of an overbearing father having a mental breakdown. But I wasn't having a breakdown. I was finally standing up. The headlights cut through the street first, followed by the sweep of red and blue across the backyard fence like a warning flare. The squad car pulled in my driveway with slow authority. Conversation stopped. Music had already been silenced, but the arrival of law enforcement turned casual defiance into anxious tension. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Hayes, a tall, even-tempered man with a sturdy presence, approached first, followed by Officer Cruz, whose eyes moved quickly over the crowd with trained perception. I opened the back door and stepped out onto the patio just as they came through the side gate. The air had shifted. Where there had been laughter and arrogance, now there was stillness and tension. Who called the police? Officer Hayes asked, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who had mediated hundreds of family disputes. I did, I said, stepping forward. This is my property. I asked everyone to leave 20 minutes ago. They refused. He nodded, professional and composed, then pulled out a small notepad. Do you have proof of ownership? I handed him my driver's license and the property tax statement I had retrieved while waiting. He scanned them quickly, confirming everything. Officer Cruz stepped toward the center of the patio. Her voice was clear and commanding. Everyone present must leave this private property immediately. The owner has requested your departure. Remaining here without his permission constitutes trespassing. The response was immediate. A ripple of movement as some guests began gathering their things. Nervous glances, uneasy whispers. No one wanted to be the one to test the officer's patience. But in the center of it all stood Ethan, flanked by his loyal echo chamber, Travis and Logan on either side, and Brianna lingering nearby. Ethan stepped forward, hands raised slightly, palms out as if to reason with the officers. This is ridiculous, he said. It's my birthday. My dad's just being vindictive. I live here too. Officer Hayes didn't flinch. Family disputes don't change property law. If your father is the legal owner and wants you off the premises, you need to comply. Ethan scoffed, trying to hold on to some shred of control. He's just mad because we had an argument. This isn't about trespassing. It's about him throwing a tantrum. Officer Cruz raised an eyebrow, but remained composed. Sir, the property owner has made a lawful request. You and your guests must vacate immediately. Around them, more guests were slipping out through the side gate, unwilling to risk further involvement. Only a handful remained. Ethan's inner circle, who clearly didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. I stood near the door, silent but present. I didn't need to say anything more. Everything was happening exactly as I had warned. You can't arrest someone for being at their own house. Ethan barked, folding his arms defiantly. Actually, we can. Officer Cruz said firmly. You don't own this property. Your father does. You're here by his permission, and he has withdrawn it. The reality started to sink in. Ethan's eyes darted around, scanning for support, but Travis and Logan were suddenly less enthusiastic. Brianna had taken a few steps back toward the edge of the lawn. Officer Hayes took a step forward, his tone firming. Young man, you are breaking the law. This is your final opportunity to leave voluntarily. Ethan stood his ground, but his voice cracked just slightly as he said, "This is insane. You can't be serious. Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Officer Cruz ordered, stepping to flank him. "You're being placed under arrest for criminal trespassing and failure to comply with a lawful order." The click of the handcuffs was louder than the quiet murmurs that spread across the backyard. It echoed in the open air like a final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Brianna gasped. Travis turned away. Logan looked down at the ground. I didn't flinch. I had spent 28 years making excuses for this boy. Tonight, I gave him consequences. Ethan twisted in their grip as they led him toward the gate, his voice shaking with fury. "You think this makes you right? You think I'll ever forgive you for this?" I met his eyes, calm and resolute. "You don't have to forgive me. You just have to understand I mean it." For the first time in years, the air in this house didn't feel thick with tension or disappointment. It was clean, stripped down to reality, and that reality was unflinching. Ethan was no longer a teenager struggling to find himself. He was a grown man who had weaponized my patience and twisted my generosity into a tool for his own comfort. The evidence had been there all along, but I had ignored it, blurred it, made excuses for it. Now, with Ethan sitting in a jail cell because of his own defiance, I could finally see the picture clearly. And what I saw was staggering. I sat down at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and a calculator. Old habits die hard. I had built a career as a systems engineer where every solution began with data, hard, indisputable facts. So I did what I had always done in times of crisis. I turned to numbers. The average rent for a home like mine in this neighborhood was $2,800 per month. Utilities ran about $350. Groceries for both of us, another $400. Then there was internet, insurance, vehicle maintenance, gas, streaming subscriptions, and the random last-minute expenses Ethan constantly seemed to have. All told, supporting my son's adult life was costing me about $4,200 every month. That was over $50,000 a year. $50,000 a year for someone who didn't just take it for granted. He resented it. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote a single line across the top, reclaiming my life. Below it, I listed out my assets, liabilities, and options. The house was nearly paid off, with just a few small payments left on the books. Its market value had climbed steadily since I bought it 20 years ago. Current listings in the neighborhood for homes in similar condition were averaging between $820,000 and $880,000. My house was one of the better ones on the block, recently updated, meticulously maintained. I had no doubt it would fetch the high end of that range, possibly more. Selling the house wouldn't just be a symbolic gesture. It would be a clean break. It would be the final removal of the stage Ethan had used for his long-running performance of entitlement. It would be the end of subsidizing his cruelty. And more importantly, it would be the beginning of something new. Something mine. For 2 hours, I sat there, calculating, reviewing, rereading numbers that spelled out the years I'd spent funding someone else's delusions. Every time I bought groceries, every time I paid the electric bill, every time I paid for another broken phone screen or filled up the gas tank of the car, Ethan treated like it was his by right. I was delaying the very peace I had earned. That realization hit harder than the arrest, harder than the birthday insult, harder than all the little digs over the years. I hadn't just been enabling Ethan's failure to launch. I'd been underwriting it month after month, year after year, believing that someday he'd turn around and see the value in the life I tried to give him. But he never did, and now I was done waiting. Ethan had asked me to disappear from his life. I intended to honor that request, but not in the way he expected. He imagined I'd sulk away, still paying the bills, still leaving the door unlocked, still waiting for him to show up and need something. That version of me no longer existed. Instead, I would disappear on my terms. I would sell the house while he was in jail, remove every trace of myself from his reach, and relocate somewhere he'd never think to look. He wouldn't even know it was happening. By the time he walked out of the detention center, expecting to return home to warm meals and Wi-Fi, there would be nothing left. No key, no couch, no safety net, just space. Space he claimed to want. Space he had earned. I opened my laptop and began searching for realtors with fast turnaround times. Within 20 minutes, I came across a highly rated agent named Natalie Chun, who specialized in expedited sales. Her reviews praised her professionalism, discretion, and efficiency. Everything I needed. I bookmarked her contact page and made a note to call her first thing in the morning. I knew that selling a house could take time, but I also knew that with the right motivation and the right price, it could be done quickly. And I had motivation. I had decades of it. "You're certain you want to sell immediately?" she asked after I explained the situation in broad strokes. "I need it sold and closed before April 29th, I said plainly. "I'll price it competitively. I'll sign every paper on time. I'll offer a $5,000 bonus if it closes in 7 days." There was a brief pause. Then came the kind of confidence only professionals with a proven track record possess. "I'll get it done," she said. By noon, she had walked the property, taken notes, and scheduled a photographer. By the following morning, the listing was live. Open houses were booked for the weekend, and my phone buzzed constantly with updates and inquiries. Natalie wasn't exaggerating. She worked fast. My house, once a fortress of Ethan's entitlement, was now a commodity. For the first time in decades, I saw it for what it really was, an asset, not a shrine. I began boxing up things I actually cared about, which, to my surprise, didn't take long. I had spent so many years accumulating things I thought Ethan might need, or want, or one day appreciate. But now that he was gone, I saw how little of it belonged to me in spirit. The tools in the garage, the grill, the entertainment center, the sectional couch. It was all built around his comfort. I packed a few photo albums, some clothes, my laptop, and the watch I once planned to give him. Everything else would stay behind. On the third day, Natalie called with news. "We have a full cash offer from a family named Rivera. No contingencies. They love the house and want to close as soon as possible." I asked to meet them before the papers were signed, not to negotiate, but to hand off the space properly. Diego and Lucia Rivera were kind, respectful, and grateful. They had 2 young children and a quiet humility that reminded me of the kind of people who understand the value of a home. When I explained that I needed to leave quickly and that I would not be around after closing, they didn't pry. They simply smiled, shook my hand, and thanked me for trusting them with a home. The sale closed the next day. With the money wired directly into my account and the document signed, I stood in the now empty living room and looked at the bare walls, the clean floors, the echo of silence where Ethan's music used to rattle the window panes. I wrote a letter on a sheet of my engineering notepad, simple, final, and without room for interpretation. "Ethan, you said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I've decided to grant your wish. The house has been sold. I am traveling extensively and will be unreachable indefinitely. You now have the independence you've always demanded. Thomas." I placed the letter inside a plain envelope, wrote his name on the front, and sealed it. No return address, no explanations, just a signature that confirmed I meant every word. I handed the envelope to Lucia and explained that my son might stop by shortly after they moved in. "He doesn't know the house is sold," I said, and her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded with understanding. "We'll give him the letter," she promised. I thanked her and walked out the door for the last time. With my small suitcase in hand, I walked next door and knocked on Howard Bates's door. He had been my neighbor for 15 years, a quiet man with a well-trimmed yard and a habit of leaving extra tomatoes from his garden on my porch every August. When he opened the door and saw the suitcase, he didn't ask questions. "Come on in, Thomas," he said. "Guest room's made up." I told him only that I'd sold the house and needed a place to stay for a few days. He didn't press. That's the kind of man Howard was, respectful of privacy, solid as bedrock. That night, I sat in his upstairs guest room, watching through the window as the Rivera family moved in. The lights in what used to be Ethan's bedroom came on first, then the kitchen, then the living room. The silhouettes behind the curtains weren't mine anymore. And that was exactly the point. From that window, I had the perfect view of the front walkway. And from that vantage point, I would witness the final lesson unfold when Ethan came home. I thought about everything that had brought us to this point, the insults, the arrogance, the hollow laughter, and I felt no regret. I had given Ethan every opportunity to grow, to engage, to change. Instead, he had chosen to push, mock, and demand. I had absorbed it all, believing that love required endurance. But now I understood that love without boundaries breeds contempt. Ethan had received love in endless quantities, but never learned respect, because I had never required it. Now, he would learn it the only way left, through loss. As I turned off the lamp and settled into bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in years. The Rivera family had settled in comfortably over the last few days, and by now their daily rhythm had become familiar. Diego would load the trunk of his car with work tools around 8:30. Lucia would help the children prepare for school, and the household would settle into a gentle hum that had nothing to do with me. And that was exactly the way I wanted it. But today was different. Today was the day Ethan would be released from jail. I knew the time, 9 a.m., because I had confirmed it with the county 2 days earlier. That meant he'd likely arrive back here around 9:30, give or take traffic or the time it took him to process his new reality. I had no idea what condition he'd be in physically, but I was certain of one thing. He would return with the same assumptions he'd always carried, that the house would be there, that I would be there, that nothing truly permanent could happen to him because I had always been the constant. He would expect the door to open when he turned the key. He would expect his room to be untouched. He would expect the refrigerator to be stocked and the Wi-Fi to be working. And when all of that failed to appear, he would expect an explanation. But what he would find was something entirely outside of his expectations. I didn't have to wait long. At precisely 9:34, Ethan appeared at the far end of the sidewalk, walking with the slow, disoriented gait of someone recently processed back into freedom. He wore the same clothes he had on when he was arrested, wrinkled jeans, a black hoodie, and sneakers with worn soles. In one hand, he held a small, clear plastic bag that likely contained his phone, keys, wallet, and a receipt for his belongings. He looked thinner, not dramatically, but noticeably. Jail hadn't starved him, but it had clearly peeled back a few layers of bravado. Still, as he approached the house, there was something in his stride that made my jaw tighten, an unearned confidence, a belief that nothing fundamental had shifted, that this was all a temporary blip. He moved up the walkway like a man coming home after vacation, not a man returning to face the aftermath of burning every bridge. When he reached the front door, he pulled out his key, inserted it into the lock, and twisted. The key didn't turn. He frowned, tried again, jiggled it, then checked the key as if it might have magically changed in his pocket. A moment later, the door opened, but not for him. Maria Rivera stepped into the doorway, a calm but firm expression on her face. Ethan blinked, confused. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice already rising. "What are you doing in my house?" Maria didn't flinch. "This is our home," she said. "We bought last week. Are you Ethan?" He looked stunned. Of course I'm Ethan. This is my house. What the hell is going on? She nodded, stepped back inside for a moment, and returned with the envelope I had left. The previous owner left this for you, she said, extending it toward him. He took it with visible hesitation, as if it might explode in his hands. I watched from Howard's window, unmoving, my coffee growing cold beside me. Ethan stared at the envelope for a few seconds before tearing it open with shaking fingers. His lips moved silently as he read the short note. I could see the change ripple through him. First confusion, then disbelief, then horror. He read it again, then a third time, as if repetition could somehow alter its meaning. But the words didn't change. You said you wanted me to disappear from your life forever. I've decided to grant your wish. The house has been sold. I am traveling extensively and will be unreachable indefinitely. You now have the independence you've always demanded. Thomas. I had written it in ink, clean and precise, like every blueprint I'd ever submitted in my career. Ethan stood there in stunned silence, the paper trembling in his grip. Then his knees seemed to buckle just slightly, and he sat down on the front steps without asking for permission. Maria lingered in the doorway, uncertain. I could tell she wasn't sure whether to offer comfort or to step away and give him space. In the end, she chose the latter. She quietly closed the door, leaving Ethan alone on the porch with the weight of his own choices. From where I sat, I could see his shoulders start to shake. At first, I thought it might be rage, but then I saw his hands wipe at his eyes, and I realized he was crying. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to dodge responsibility, but real, gutted sobs of someone who finally understood the cost of what he'd said, what he'd done, what he believed. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement had crumbled. All that remained was a boy inside a man's body, finally stripped of illusion. He sat there for a long time. He didn't yell. He didn't pound on the door. He didn't call my name. He just cried quietly into the morning light. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. And in some ways, I did. But what surprised me was the sadness beneath it. Not regret, but the truth never bent. And that letter was as firm and final as the day I wrote it. From my vantage point across the yard at Howard's house, I could see everything. The way Ethan's shoulders slumped under the weight of understanding, the way his fingers curled tightly around the envelope, the way his eyes scanned the property as if still expecting me to appear and explain myself. But I didn't. I stayed where I was, quiet and still, letting the silence teach what years of speaking had failed to convey. Ethan was learning now, not from lectures or threats or second chances, but from absence, from consequences, from reality stripped of cushion. He had never known a life where I wasn't there to absorb the damage, to pay the bill, to fix what he broke. Now, finally he would. At some point, a neighbor walked by with a dog on a leash and gave him a puzzled look. Ethan didn't respond. He just rubbed his face and looked away. A few more minutes passed before the door opened behind him and Diego Rivera stepped outside. I tensed slightly, unsure how this would unfold, but Diego was calm and respectful. He leaned against the railing and spoke to Ethan in a measured tone I couldn't hear from across the way. Ethan responded slowly, nodding, still gripping the letter. Then he stood up and shook Diego's hand. I saw him mouth the words, "Thank you," before stepping off the porch and walking down the sidewalk with the same slowness he'd arrived with. But this time his body language was different. He wasn't confused anymore. He was devastated. And though a part of me felt a familiar ache, the larger part felt peace. Because this was exactly what he needed. The house was gone. The safety net was gone. I was gone. Ethan would now be forced to define himself without the scaffolding of my unconditional support. I didn't know where he was going, and I didn't need to. This wasn't about tracking him or punishing him. It was about letting go completely. I had watched over him for 28 years, cleaned up after him, bailed him out of messes, and swallowed words I should have said because I feared damaging the fragile thread that connected us. But that thread had already frayed long before today. Ethan had burned it thread by thread, with every snide comment, every entitled demand, every public humiliation disguised as a joke. I had just refused to see it. But now, watching him walk away with nothing but a wrinkled letter and a wounded heart, I felt the final fiber snap, and with it a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lifted off my chest. I stepped away from the window and sat down in the guest chair near the dresser. Howard's house was quiet as always. He was out in the backyard, tending to his tomatoes, giving me space without needing to be asked. I thought about the years I spent teaching Ethan how to ride a bike, how to tie his shoes, how to navigate heartbreak in middle school fights. I remembered the bedtime stories, the science fair projects, the time I stayed up all night helping him finish a presentation because he forgot about it until the night before. Those memories weren't false, they were real, but they were also incomplete because alongside every tender moment was a growing imbalance, a slow tilt toward disrespect that I kept excusing. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual. A missed thank you here, a cruel joke there, until the boy I loved had become a man who saw me as an obstacle instead of a father. And I had allowed it, out of fear, out of love, out of the misguided belief that enduring mistreatment was noble. But dignity isn't optional. It's essential. I couldn't teach Ethan to respect others when I didn't require him to respect me. And now, with the door closed and the chapter ended, I had finally enforced the lesson I should have taught him years ago. That love has boundaries. That care is not the same as servitude. That forgiveness does not mean forgetting. I thought about calling him, but only for a moment. Then I remembered the look on his face when he read the letter. It had landed. It had cut through the fog. My silence had spoken louder than 1,000 conversations. He would wrestle with it, deny it, maybe even hate me for a while. But deep down, he would remember it forever. He would remember the day he came home and found it was no longer his home. He would remember the words he said in front of his friends, the cruel birthday wish that had finally been granted. He would remember the humiliation of being arrested, the shock of finding strangers in the place he took for granted, and the quiet finality of a letter written by a man who had nothing left to give. That was his turning point. What he did with it was up to him. I couldn't control his growth, but I had finally stopped enabling his stagnation. 2 weeks after I saw Ethan crumble on that porch, I left Howard's guest room for good. I didn't say much, just shook his hand and thanked him for giving me shelter when I needed silence. He nodded, gave me a warm clap on the shoulder, and told me to send a postcard if I ever felt like it. I promised I would, though we both knew I wouldn't. Some departures had to be complete. I drove out of town with no clear destination, only a compass in my chest pointing toward peace. I passed landmarks I once knew like the back of my hand, school signs, coffee shops, the hardware store where I used to buy screws for repairs Ethan never thanked me for, and I didn't feel regret. I felt release. I kept driving until the familiar names on signs turned to strangers. I crossed state lines and didn't look back. I found a small town nestled against the edge of a quiet lake in northern Idaho, where the air smelled like pine and everyone minded their own business. I paid cash for a modest cabin and opened a new bank account under my middle name. No forwarding address, no online trail, no phone number to trace. I became a ghost, just as Ethan had once demanded I become. I started fishing in the mornings and reading again. The kind of long, dense books I used to love before life became an endless series of concessions. I took long walks, cooked for myself, and learned to enjoy the taste of my own solitude. At night, I would sit on the back deck and listen to the wind rustling through the trees. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I didn't check social media. I didn't ask Howard for updates. I let Ethan live in the world he'd asked for, a world without me. Months passed like pages in a book. One season faded into the next. I watched the leaves turn gold and then fall away, watched the lake freeze over and melt again. I grew stronger. My face softened. The bitterness faded. I didn't hate Ethan. I didn't love him the same way either. What remained was a quiet ache, like a song I used to know but hadn't heard in a long time. One morning, I went into town for coffee and saw a man on the sidewalk holding a cardboard sign that read, "Willing to work, need food." He looked nothing like Ethan, but something about the tilt of his shoulders made me stop. I offered him a sandwich from my bag, and as he took it, he said, "Thank you, sir," with a kind of reverence I wasn't used to hearing. I nodded and walked on, but that moment stayed with me. It reminded me that people change when they hurt enough, when they fall far enough, when there's no one left to catch them. I wondered if Ethan had fallen that far. I wondered if he had learned anything. The answer came 2 years later. It arrived in the form of a letter, postmarked from a city I'd never lived in and addressed my middle name at a post office box I'd opened only a month prior. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting uneven but unmistakably familiar. It read, "Dad, I don't know if this will ever reach you, or if you'll even read it. I just wanted to say thank you. You were right. About everything. I've been sober for 11 months. I got a job fixing HVAC units. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I pay rent. I pay bills. I don't yell at anyone anymore. I'm sorry for what I said to you on my birthday. I'm sorry for what I did the night the police came. I deserved it. I didn't understand what love was until I had to build a life without it. I still don't know where you are, and maybe I never will. But if you're alive, if you ever think about me, just know I'm trying to be better. Because you gave me the gift of losing you. And that was the only thing that finally taught me who I was. I read the letter once. Then again. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside the same box where I kept my watch, the one I never gave him. I didn't cry. I didn't write back. I just sat there for a long time, listening to the wind through the pine trees. It wasn't closure, not in the way people imagine it. It wasn't a reunion or forgiveness or a Hollywood ending, but it was something real. It was proof that pain wasn't wasted, that silence had power, that boundaries could heal what words never could. I spent the rest of the day walking along the edge of the lake, letting the letter's words settle into the deepest parts of me. I didn't need Ethan to find me. I didn't need to see his face again or hear his voice or confirm that he was truly changed. His letter told me enough. It told me that sometimes disappearing isn't abandoning someone. It's forcing them to face the person they are without you. It's giving them the space to grow without your shadow, sheltering their failure. It's loving someone enough to leave. I still live in that cabin. I still fish in the mornings. I still sleep soundly. And every so often, I pull out Ethan's letter and read it again. Not because I miss him, but because I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud I let him fall. I'm proud I didn't return. I'm proud I became the kind of father who finally stopped saving his son long enough for the boy to save himself. The end. If this story meant something to you, if it made you stop and think about the weight of boundaries, the cost of love, or the power of walking away, then I'd be grateful if you gave it a like and subscribed. It helps me know that these stories still matter. I've got more to tell, and every bit of support keeps them coming. And I'm curious, what part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it when I finally walked away? When Ethan showed up to strangers in his old home? Or when that letter came years later? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from, too. Whether you're in Idaho like me, or somewhere far from pine trees and lakes, let me know. I read every word.